Greetings Internet, DDA here, and welcome to week 7 of my Card of the Week segment. Last week was Saiyan style, Saiyan wrist block. It was actually the first week that I've been doing my newly structured Card of the Week segment, so if you didn't get a chance to see that video, please click on the link. This week is freestyle, so that's any card that can be played in any style deck. And for freestyle, I chose Blinding Energy Move. And this card has an effect. Limit 2 per deck. You must banish the top 2 cards of your life deck to play this card. Energy attack. Damage 3 life cards. At the beginning of the next action, this combat, end combat. Now attacks differ from blocks in that you look for different things that make these cards good. When I thought of the things that make an attack good and what you want to maximize when you decide the attacks to put in your deck, the first thing I thought of was damage to cost or requirement ratio. Basically, the damage the attack is going to do compared to anything that you need to happen in order to play the card. Blinding Energy Move is unique in that it requires you to remove cards off the top of your life deck in order to play it. This means that immediately you're not going to want to play this card in any deck that you're going to try to win by Dragon Ball victory. Because they're random cards off the top of your life deck, they can remove Dragon Balls from your deck. You know, removing cards off the top of your life deck isn't damage, and Dragon Balls only go to the bottom of your life deck when they are discarded for damage. This is not a damage effect. This is requiring you to remove cards from your life deck in order to play this card. Right off the bat, you can see this attack's damage to cost ratio is pitiful. It only does 3 life cards of damage, and requiring you to remove 2 cards off the top of your life deck means that you're only netting 1 damage from this. Not only that, you're removing your cards, whereas your opponent can still use endurance on the damage that you do to him. You're only netting 1 card of damage overall with this card, unless you're playing orange or black style. Or you have some damage modifiers on the field. Despite that this card has a pretty hefty requirement to play it, it does have one advantage going for it, in that it's an energy attack that doesn't cost power stages to perform. That means that regardless of what power stage that you're at, you can always play this card from your hand to end combat. You may think twice before adding this card into your deck. It removes random cards, so you do have a chance in removing those key cards from your deck, killing your combo and any chances you may have to win the game. While this attack only does net you about 1 damage total given its requirement to play, as far as damage per cost ratio goes, I'm going to give this card a 3 out of 5. Being that it's an energy attack that doesn't cost power stages to perform, that in itself is enough to consider it to use in your deck. You can always count on this card to be able to be used, unless of course it's towards the end of the game and using it would actually kill you. The second thing that I thought of to judge attacks on, much like blocks, are their effects. When you think of this card's effect, I want you to think of control. That is, control of combat. When this card is in your hand, you're going to be able to decide when combat is over. Literally, the card is in your hand. If you want to tough out combat and duke it out with your opponent and last to the end of combat, you have the option to do that. Alternatively, you can end combat whenever you would like by just playing this card from your hand. There's only really one other attack in this game that does a similar effect, and that is Krillin's Solar Flare. Now, Krillin is pretty good at running away, if I do say so myself. Probably the second most character in the game that runs away from combat, the first being Hercule, who pretty much spends the whole series behind a rock somewhere, or underneath a sheet that looks like a rock. Even though Krillin has the powerful Solar Flare that allows him to blind his opponents and end combat, that attack has to hit. The difference here is that this effect is not a hit effect, it is an immediate effect, which means that your opponent can do nothing to stop it. It doesn't matter what he has in his hand. You're in control of combat. You decide. That means that when you're considering whether or not to play this card, you need to think about the damage that your opponent has done to you already, the damage that he's going to be able to do in the rest of the combat, and the damage that you have to be able to output that combat as well. If you're in a situation where your opponent is going to be able to massively outdo the damage you do in that combat, then that's a situation that you're going to want to use that card. This is a little difficult to do. It's going to take some practice to know this. This is not a card that's easy to use by any means. You're going to have to be able to project out a combat to the end at the start in order to maximize the potential of this card. The longer combat goes on, the worse this card is to play. It's not for damage. You do not play this card for damage. You play this card to get out of a bad situation and get yourself the hell out of Dodge. there is nothing your opponent can do about it. And for that reason, I'm going to give this card a 5 out of 5 for effect. The third thing that I'm going to be judging attacks on is, of course, combo potential. That is how this card meshes with other cards in the game. This card is primarily a defensive card. You're not really going to be comboing this card with cards in your deck unless, of course, you play a deck that's going to want to make the game last as long as possible. The main thing that this card is going to do is disrupt whatever your opponent is doing in combat. He's entering with certain cards in his hand and has a plan, and this card is the ultimate disruptor. I can really see three main situations that you're going to want to play this card. When your opponent uses a really powerful effect that lasts for the remainder of combat, you can play this card to get out of that combat, ending that effect. Nearly every style in the game right now has a really powerful effect that lasts for the remainder of combat that would make you want to use a card like this. Time is a Warrior's Tool immediately comes to mind, as well as Red Blazing Aura, Black Swirl, Black Defensive Burst. The second situation that you may want to think about using this card in is when your opponent tutors a card into his hand. He's tutoring a specific card into his hand to mesh with the other cards he has in his hand. This card disrupts that. Tutor cards that you want to look out for when considering to play this card: Visiting the Past. Being that your opponent gains straight card advantage with Visiting the Past when entering as the defender, chances are he's going to use that card when you enter on him. If you're holding this card in your hand, you can bait him into using his Visiting the Past and then immediately end combat, making him essentially waste the effect of the card. Other tutor cards that you want to look out for: Namekian Overtime, Orange Uppercut. The third most relevant situation that you might want to consider using this card in is when your opponent disrupts your plans or disrupts your field. If you have a really nice setup and your opponent manages to Red Observation, wiping your entire field, you may need a turn to prepare and recover from the devastation of your entire field. Are you at 4 anger and have your opponent enter and open with a blue head knock? Maybe you could use a turn to recuperate. There are just a ton of situations that make this card useful, and for that reason, I'm going to give it a 5 out of 5 for combo potential. This is a card that you're going to want to hold in your hand for the right, precise moment to use. Using it correctly could mean you swinging a game in your favor, and likewise, using it incorrectly could hurt you just as much as it could help you. Adding up the scores of this card, give it a high score of 13 out of 15. This is a very strong card, but like I said earlier, the use of this card isn't always obvious. And this does get a 13 out of 15 because it is a strong card that has a place in almost any deck. However, you're only going to be able to see the strength of this card when you use it correctly. So I hope you like week 7 of my Card of the Week segment. This ends our first rotation of my Card of the Week, so that means next week we're going to start back up with Black Style. If you like this video, please don't hesitate to hit the like button to let me know I'm doing alright. And as always, turn your dial to Random Number Gaming for weekly updates for the Dragon Ball Z card game.